My name is Elle Siegel, and I am the Advocacy Outreach Director at Rails to Trails Conservancy, based in DC. We appreciate you taking time this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're coming from. We're going to be discussing building collaborative relationships and really bridging the gap between planning and advocacy. So we have a wonderful panel with us today. We'll introduce them in a moment. But thanks again for being here. Next slide, please. This webinar is brought to you by our Trail Nation collaborative. And for those of you who might be new to Trails Conservancy, our Trail Nation consists of projects, which I'll highlight in a moment. Our Trail Nation Playbook, which is a fantastic resources based in our decades of experience, and our Trail Nation Collaborative, which is a peer-to-peer learning network that is free and available to all, really designed to break down silos and information share with folks in our movement across the country. So thanks for being part of this movement. Next slide, please. So we have Trail Nation projects across the country, ranging from one in DC to in Miami, in Wisconsin. So really across the country, we're doing this work. And as we'll be focusing on today, this work really involves collaboration. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, I'm sorry, I got things out of order there, but collaboration is key, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we have a wonderful panel today. We have with us Audra Koester Thomas, who is the Assistant Executive Director of the Maricopa Association of Governments, MAG. We have Macy Landtrip, the Communications and Program Specialist at Arizona Forward, a key partner of MAG's. And then we have Kay Bork, the Transportation Planning Project Manager at MAG as well. So we'll be hearing from each of these speakers momentarily. And thanks so much for being here. So next slide, please. Before we begin, I also want to flag some important technical assistance resources. So we will be using the Q&A function today. So please drop your questions in the Q&A box, which you should have access to at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will get to Q&A towards the end of the session. Please, if you have any technical assistance issues, we have a link here, but it's probably best for you to troubleshoot directly with Zoom. So this webinar will also be recorded, and there's live transcriptions available. So thank you. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to kick things off and introduce Audra today. Audra, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Elle. And on behalf of all of our member agencies of the Maricopa Association of Governments, thank you for inviting us to talk about an endeavor, a long-range planning exercise that we've spent the better part of 7 years endeavoring, and with the partnership of a very large village. And being able to tell this story is important to our 32 members, our mayors, Native Nation presidents, and county supervisors. So thanks so much for the opportunity to give a little bit of an insight on how we're able to deliver multimodal transportation planning solutions in the greater Phoenix region. Next slide. So just to provide a little bit of orientation for those of you who might not be familiar with the Southwest or even Arizona in particular, the Maricopa Association of Governments is a metropolitan planning organization. We're the second largest in the country. Our planning area spans over 10,000 square miles. And so what you're seeing here on this slide is a representation. We really reflect, and our planning area is largely central Arizona, representing the larger Phoenix metropolitan area. And you see here the 32 member agencies. These are the cities, towns, 3 sovereign Native nations, and 2 counties that are represented in our planning area. For comparison, our planning area is about the size of the state of New Jersey, larger than the state of New Jersey, larger than the state of Massachusetts, for comparison. We are also representative of about 70% of the state's population, Arizona's population, with nearly 5 million people. If we were our own state, we would be the 25th most populous state in the country. So, for K and I, we really have interesting and fun jobs because the diversity of needs in a region this large really span all kinds of different modes and solutions. And so it makes our jobs both challenging, but also fun as well. Next slide. I know my audience. I know my audience today, largely folks who live in an active transportation, trails world, pedestrian and alternative modes access area and arena. So I wanted to feature a little bit here just what our existing active transportation network looks like. So we've zoomed in a little bit from the previous slide. This really does reflect mostly our urbanized area within our metropolitan planning organization or planning area itself. Center is the city of Phoenix, our largest and core city here, but this represents an area just smaller than the state of Connecticut. So if you're thinking for comparative network size, and you see here illustrated the variety of trails, bike lanes, and network we have in our active transportation system throughout our region. You'll notice a lot of square lines. We're notable because we have an arterial network that's situated largely on a grid with just a few mountains and canal networks that interrupt it. And that really provides a really great basis of our transportation network, both for transit and roadways, but also it helps foster our active transportation network as well. You also then see our canal systems where we've been able to partner with our irrigation networks and energy partners to be able to provide access and infrastructure along some of that built environment as well. Next slide. Notable in our region is that we're fairly young compared to our partners, especially on the East Coast. So the Phoenix metropolitan region really just started booming in population, of course, after the advent of air conditioning. And we saw that population really start to grow in the 70s and 80s. What this slide demonstrates is just how far we've come in about 40 years. Back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have any high capacity transportation infrastructure outside of Interstate 17, which goes north and south through the core of our region. Even Interstate 10, which goes ocean to ocean, coast to coast, that wasn't complete until here in our region in the 1990s, the final segment of Interstate 10 was completed. Ultimately, our mayors recognized that the high growth rate that we were experiencing was in need of infrastructure to support that. Unfortunately, the state at the time did not have a sufficient funding revenue source to deliver. And so mayors back in the 80s decided they would take it upon themselves to tax themselves to deliver a transportation network to meet the growing needs of a growing region. And in 1985, established a dedicated half-cent sales tax to fund, at the time, a freeway network. If you've been to our region, that's probably our most notable piece of infrastructure as a robust freeway network that was built by and for the region, very unique compared to other parts of the country. That sales tax, however, was one of the first of its kind in the country. Now we see replicated in regions across the country, sales tax initiatives being delivered because residents, constituents see the value of transportation investment in quality of life. And certainly there's different projects and programs that are delivered accordingly, but really it's become a really fundamental tool to deliver transportation projects across the region. We were one of the first to deliver it. We've had a long history in doing so. You see here ultimately what 40 years worth of that dedicated half-cent sales tax has been able to deliver just on a freeway high capacity transportation infrastructure and light rail system network through the series of illustrations on this slide. Next slide. Our sales tax will expire at the end of this calendar year, at the end of 2025. And so about 8 years ago, we started getting our long-range planning apparatus focused. We were needing to develop a new long-range plan because certainly we have been successful in delivering economic development, and we're finding more and more neighbors coming and wanting to live here in the greater Phoenix region. And so we started a plan development process 8 years ago, and ultimately initiated that process first through public engagement. Because the investments here in this region are delivered through a sales tax that has to be voter endorsed, we knew that we needed to build a plan that was particularly resonant with our constituents. And so we started that process through public engagement. We wanted to know what values existed in this region amongst our constituency, what things are important to our constituents, because we wanted to protect them in developing the plan itself, and certainly deliver more of what our residents wanted later. So we did that through our values mapping. We had lots of focus groups. We had a big call for engagement. And you'll see here illustrated over the course of about 4 years, starting from 2019 through 2023, the span of engagement, public engagement that we had. We certainly wanted feedback from constituents and residents, but we also actively engaged a variety of diverse stakeholders, inviting them to the table very early to better understand needs of their represented interests, and also to be able to develop a plan that really did adequately address the diversity of needs in a region as large as ours. That included bringing stakeholders together that perhaps sometimes don't always agree on the solution. We had freight interests at the table at the same time as active transportation interests, taxpayer interests, and others. We included different constituencies and represented populations because we wanted to better understand early and often how we could best address a composition of transportation investments that made the most sense. And you see here, over the course of 5 years, we had over 500 meetings. You'll see my story as it unfolds here in the next couple of slides. Since then, we've had many hundreds more meetings to get this ultimately over the finish line. Next slide. One of the key things that early public engagement ultimately delivered was that the core goals associated with our regional transportation plan. For those of you who might be coming to us from a metropolitan planning organization, you may call this your Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP. This is our long-range vision and ultimately what we designed over the course of many years with stakeholder feedback. Next slide. The three important goals that we heard largely from the community here were need for safety and addressing safety across the spectrum of users, not just focused on those in their automobiles, but in part our most vulnerable users of the system, our bicyclists and pedestrians, for which we have a very high crash and fatality rate in this region. We heard loud and clear that safety needed to be a priority as part of our plan, and we wanted to respond accordingly. Mobility. We are a very large geography region, as I expressed already, but people here very much told us they value the ability to pick a community that represents different amenities or needs of their families, and that there's a transportation system that responds, getting them to either their jobs or educational opportunities that may be in a different part of the region. They highly value the opportunity for choices also in how they get from here to there. And then livability. Quality of life was expressed as a very high value. People live here because they see a high quality of life and they want that protected and preserved. And so these are some of the core elements for which we built a transportation plan around. Next slide. Well, I'll spend less time talking about the actual plan itself and more about how we got there. I do want to illustrate, for the purpose of this audience, what that ultimately looked like. You'll see here our plan ultimately expressed in this slide in kind of quantitative values, either by miles or numbers. I want to direct your attention to the lower left-hand corner. One of the things that we heard is that that our region is growing in a way that we have many different kinds of transportation needs. And the plan our constituents want it to respond to all those different needs. And you'll see one of our strategies to build a long-range plan that was also responsive to different needs was to set aside pots of funding for express priorities. And one of those, in fact, the highest valued priority was non-motorized transportation or active transportation investments. Our elected officials have set aside over $800 million over the course of the next 20 years dedicated simply to non-motorized transportation investments. Those are bicycle investments, pedestrian investments, ways to address safety of those who are not in a vehicle. And they feel that this is a very high priority. And you'll see, based on the public feedback, in concert with the direction from our elected officials, the largest single programmatic investment we have in our 20-year plan is this funding for non-motorized transportation. Next slide. As I mentioned, we had a tremendous number of diverse voices at the table. And that was really important because ultimately developing the plan was kind of one phase of our work, but unique here in Arizona, unique specifically to us, for a local tax initiative, this local tax initiative to go to our county voters, we needed the permission of the state legislature. And for any of those who follow politics, especially around elections, you may know a little bit about some things that have been happening here in Arizona, and particularly Maricopa County over the last couple of years. It's been an interesting and dynamic time with politics, and ultimately that played out live in front of our intended endeavors to go to the voters. We needed to get the permission of the Arizona legislature and governor to actually send a renewal of a tax to our local voters. At the end of our plan development, which was unanimously endorsed by all 32 member agencies at our agency, we went to the legislature and drafted a bill simply to send this package of investments to voters for their consideration. We did that in the year 2022. We're successful in the legislature, almost got a super majority we got a super majority out of the Senate, almost a super majority out of the House of Representatives, sent it to the governor around the 4th of July, and we're surprised when the governor, then Governor Doug Ducey, vetoed that legislation, indicating inflationary pressures were too much for taxpayers to bear. As a reminder, simply all we were asking was for our initiative to go to the voters and let them decide themselves. That was also an election year for our legislature, and so we came back to the year 2023 with a very different legislature. We lost our bill sponsor from 2022, in part because he supported this issue, and we're having to develop a lot of relationships. Ultimately, the point I would love to make to all of you is the value of early public engagement, because ultimately the fact that we invited a variety of diverse stakeholders, that we had unanimous support at our board for a transportation plan, paid dividends because we relied on that support and those voices at the legislature to articulate the large village that it took to build this plan and how they were supportive. And you'll see our partners illustrated in one of these photos, Arizona Forward, who you will hear from next, who was participative in the plan development process, who was engaged and provided feedback, ultimately was one of the many dozens of stakeholder and advocacy organizations, as well as our mayors, who were asking the legislature and testifying in front of the legislature their endorsement for sending this to voters. Ultimately, after the longest legislative session in Arizona history because of our bill, in 2023, the governor received a bill that was passed by the Arizona legislature, and she ultimately signed it on August 1st of last year, or of 2023, excuse me. That ultimately gave the direction to send this to voters last year, and on November 5th, just a couple of months ago, our voters overwhelmingly supported Proposition 479 at an actually higher rate than they voted for the preceding 20-year tax extension. I think what this tells us is that early engagement from diverse stakeholders and constituent feedback ultimately pays dividends, both at the voting booth as well as the acceptance and ownership of the plan itself. Next slide. So with that, I will hand it back over to Al, and we'll talk a little bit more. Back to Al, and we'll talk a little bit more about Arizona Forward.
Thank you so much, Audra. And I think there's going to be a lot of great questions on the tactics and great work that you did to get that over the finish line. We're going to be hearing from Macy at Arizona Forward, and Arizona Forward is a close partner of MAG's for many years, and they were a key constituency at the table in this advocacy work. So Macy, over to you.
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for tuning in. Like was explained, my name is Macy Lantrip. I am the Communications and Program Manager for Arizona Forward. Lori Singleton, who you saw in that previous photo, she planned on being here this morning, but unfortunately could not make it. So I am happy to step in, and we're excited just to be here to show you a little bit more about who we are as an organization and how we're able to bring our partnership to the table. That's truly significant to the metropolitan Phoenix community. So if you go to the next slide, please. So Arizona Forward was formed in 1969 when two civic organizations merged to form a nonprofit that was focused on environmental issues. We've been doing this work for over 55 years now, and we plan to continue for another 55 years. Our mission is to bring businesses and civic leaders together to promote cooperative efforts to improve the environmental sustainability and the economic vitality of our state and local region. And our vision is to mobilize the state's business leaders and policymakers to leverage the collective power to influence how we can best grow communities, stimulate our economy, and enhance our environment here in Arizona. Go ahead and next slide. So this slide highlights This slide shows our priorities. It covers most of the environmental issues facing Arizona. So we span the gamut from climate action, water supply, to leveraging mobility and clean air. So as you can see, this is kind of a full encompassing scope of what we do, and where our priorities lie here for Arizona Forward. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights two of the significant projects that Arizona Forward has proudly supported for many years. These projects reflect the very essence of our mission, which is convening dialogue, informing, and educating to drive sustainable progress across Arizona. Arizona Forward is proud to be an organization that helped create the legislation establishing the Rio Salado Development District many years ago, which you will hear about in just a little bit. That's a photo down at the bottom of the mayor's waving that in. And that is began as a vision to transform a dry riverbed into a vibrant community asset. It's grown into a remarkable example of how public and private collaboration can achieve lasting change. And again, you will hear more about that from the next presenter. But this project has been an enduring focus for us as we've partnered with many key stakeholders, including Arizona State University and others, to ensure it continues to serve as both a beautification initiative and a vital resource for our community. Another thing on this slide is Prop 479, as you can see in the other photo. Arizona Forward has been at the table for many years, going back to the very original version of the sales tax, which is so very significant in establishing transportation for the valley. We were happy to play a key role in fostering collaboration and advancing these two initiatives. Over the decades, our involvement has demonstrated the power of bringing diverse voices to the table to help shape a better future for our communities. You can see in that photo, that's one of the educational gatherings for Prop 479 that MAG and Arizona Forward put together. Next slide, please. So Arizona Forward engages in many ways when it comes to advocating for key initiatives that we all know will protect the environment, enhance economic development, and improve quality of life. Some of the things that we do include advocate for legislation at the legislature, which you saw in the photo of our CEO, Lori Singleton. And we submit ballot statements. We recently submitted a ballot statement for Prop 479 just this last election year. We organize informational meetings and materials. We execute engaging social media. We leverage our email marketing to reach our 500+ member network, in which we educate and inform our members. We author op-eds, press releases, and white pagers. And those are just some of the things that we begin to do to really harvest and go forward with this partnership. Next slide, please. So that was just a quick snapshot of who we are and how we can partner and what we do to partner. And so now I know we were going to hear from Maricopa County about the Rio Reimagined transportation plan that I touched on. And so that's an exciting and forward-thinking approach to enhance connectivity and mobility across the region. So I will pass that over to hear a little bit more, but that is a snapshot of what we do.
Thank you, Macy. And as we're pulling up slides, I'll just note that Arizona Forward was so critical in getting this legislation across the line at the legislature. And I know that advocacy partners were key for this. So, Kay, do you want to talk a little bit about the Rio Reimagined study and all the incredible partnership in that project?
Yeah, thank you, Elle, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here today to share some information on a brand new project that MAG will be kicking off next month, and that's the Rio Reimagined Active Transportation Study. So with the passing of Proposition 479 that Audra spoke to, MAG will be launching a new active transportation competitive funding program, which will be providing around $40 million annually for non-motorized transportation projects in our region. And again, this investment is a direct response to the public feedback that we received during our regional transportation plan update, emphasizing the need for safe and accessible active transportation options. So the Rio Reimagined Active Transportation Study is going to help guide how our member agencies plan and build active transportation projects. And it will also be a huge resource for accessing and using this new competitive program at MAG. As well as an implementation tool, this study is also intended to complement and support the bigger Rio Reimagined initiative that Macy just spoke to. And so today, I just want to tell you about how the project came together, the teamwork and conversations that got us here, and how we're going to keep moving and working forward, or how we're going to work together to move this project forward. Next slide, please. And I think those are out of order. Thank you very much. Great. So the study's primary purpose is to establish a unified vision for a multi-use path that connects communities along the Rio Salado corridor. In addition to linking these communities, the plan will identify essential connections to significant activity centers within each of these communities. By doing so, the study aims to facilitate and support the various transportation, recreation, land use, and economic development activities envisioned for the area. And this study has 3 objectives in mind. Building upon the planning work within the area, the study seeks to develop an active transportation vision that is well integrated and considers the needs of each community. It aims to select a preferred river path alignment, ensuring it serves as an effective and valuable asset for residents and visitors. And the study will also provide a framework to guide future connections, allowing our member agencies to effectively develop and implement projects in line with the overall vision of the study. Next slide, please. So this is the study area boundary. As you can see, it is a very large area. It's covering approximately 90 miles in length and about 2 to 3 miles in width. It follows the Rio Salado and parts of the Gila River corridors. It's connecting 6 cities, unincorporated areas of Maricopa County, and 3 tribal nations. And within the much larger MAG study area lies the Rio Reimagined Initiative study area, and that is shown in the green boundary. Next slide, please. So these photos showcase the variety of landscapes and urbanization scale within the Rio Reimagined corridor. On the right, we're looking east along the Rio Salado, and this features the iconic Tempe Town Lake. This is a significant regional attraction that opened in 2003. And originally, this project was proposed about 50 years ago by ASU, Arizona State University architecture students, which actually laid the groundwork for the Rio Reimagined initiative. And I also want to mention again that Arizona Forward was instrumental about 20 years ago that authorized the legislation that played a critical role in actually facilitating the construction of Tempe Town Lake. And in contrast, along the western portion of the Rio Salado, shown on the left, this is characterized by farming, active sand and gravel, mining, and emerging development, as well as a future highway expansion. While it is very rural in character, it is also identified as a very high growth area in the valley. So with these varying landscapes and degrees of urbanization, this will likely result in distinct active transportation requirements for each segment along the river. Next slide, please. So this is a story of how the project actually was initiated. I think the actual initiation focuses on 3 areas, and that would be collaboration, leveraging resources, and capitalizing on shared goals. The inception actually began with the joint efforts of the newly appointed Senior Director for Rio Reimagined at ASU and the MAG Urban Waters Ambassador. And together they engaged our Rio partners to advance the Rio Reimagined initiative, to gain insights into past projects and understand community priorities. And from these very early discussions and collective efforts, a strong desire for a regional scale river trail project emerged. And recognizing the significance of a comprehensive study, MAG, as the region's planning agency, sought support from member agencies for this project. This led to MAG Regional Council support and funding approval, marking a crucial milestone in advancing regional active transportation. And I just wanted to mention who the Rio partners are. This is an informal group that's convened by ASU Rio Reimagined staff, and it's made up of public and private and nonprofit organizations. They meet very regularly to discuss projects, networking, as well as building coalitions and to collaborate on projects. Next slide, please. So MEG's dedication to collaboration and outreach with key partners has been key in shaping the actual scope of the study. Engaging these agencies early, such as ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, Federal Highways Administration, tribal historic preservation officials, and Native nations has allowed MEG to gain valuable feedback, better understand critical issues, and refine the study's focus to address stakeholders' concerns. Further collaboration with ASU Rio Reimagined staff and the City of Phoenix provided additional input and perspectives, ensuring a comprehensive approach. And then the alignment between the MAG study and the other regional initiatives, which is the Rio Phoenix, and this is the City of Phoenix current land use planning effort along 20 miles of the Rio Salado corridor, and also aligning with ASU Rio Reimagined's visioning process. This is a process they're engaging. They're very early in this process, but they will be engaging a consultant to actually scope a visioning blueprint as they move forward. So these efforts highlight the importance of cooperation in our shared goals. These early collaborative efforts have established a solid foundation for cooperation and a mutual commitment to the project's success, as well as each other's success. Next slide, please. So MEG has leveraged, MEG has leveraged and benefited from existing networks and relationships to enhance our peer-to-peer collaboration and resource sharing. And some key actions included engaging the MAG Active Transportation Committee and the Rio Reimagined staff in the consultant selection process, ensuring transparency and diverse input. And to back up, the MAG Active Transportation Committee is made up of our member agencies, transportation planning and engineering staff who advance active transportation in our region. The second is we attended regular coordination meetings with ASU and the City of Phoenix, which has promoted a knowledge sharing and alignment with our complementary initiatives. These meetings have been great. We have identified new stakeholders and foster new partnerships. We share information to expand community engagement, or working on efforts to cross-promote our projects to boost public awareness and participation, and also coordinating all these efforts to help avoid confusion and avoid stakeholder burnout from these complementary efforts. And lastly, MAG's been maintaining project momentum through our frequent check-ins with our MAG Urban Waters Ambassador. She's been engaging the Rio Reimagined Advisory Group, and they are comprised of managers and directors of MAG member agencies who have an interest in the Rio Reimagined study area. Next slide, please. So building upon this strong foundation of collaboration, established with stakeholders. We will continue to prioritize community engagement and cooperation throughout the study development. And some key strategies include one, establishing a stakeholder advisory group. This group will be comprised of member agencies within the Rio Reimagined corridor. It will include the Rio Reimagined staff. And this group is going to be help guiding the study and bringing a diverse expertise and perspectives to the project. Two is creating a community engagement plan. So with input from the stakeholder advisory group, we'll develop a comprehensive outreach and engagement plan to ensure meaningful and inclusive community participation throughout the study. And then three, I will also facilitate regular updates and feedback sessions. This is to maintain transparency and alignment with the much broader Rio Reimagined initiative. We'll provide ongoing updates and seek feedback from these groups and partnerships. So by incorporating these strategies, Megan will ensure a participatory and transparent process that represents the diverse needs, aspirations, and visions of the communities involved in our study. Next slide, please. Oh, well. So in summary, MAG Rio Reimagined Active Transportation Study, I think exemplifies adaptability, collaboration, and seizing opportunities. It has evolved from these organic discussions into a much more structured approach, fostering partnerships and engaging stakeholders at crucial moments. With continued support, the study will serve as a valuable resource, ultimately improving livability and creating a more connected, accessible, and vibrant region. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, so, and thank you to our incredible panel. So we're going to move to Q&A in just a minute. But before we do, I would be remiss without mentioning our wonderful Trail Nation Summit, which will be taking place this October 27th through 29th in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm assuming we'll be dropping some wonderful links in the chat, but it will be the place to be, and we hope we will see you in Cleveland to learn all about great collaborations happening across the country. So look out for some additional information in the chat and in follow-up and subsequent emails. So with that, we're going to move to some wonderful Q&A. So I wanted to start off with just kind of picking up on a question or on a thought that Audra and Macy highlighted regarding Prop 79. Something that at RTC we are thrilled about is the diversity of folks that come to the table when it comes to interest and support for trails and active transportation. And I know for Prop 79, you were able to bring together a coalition ranging from the local chambers of commerce to environmental groups like Arizona Forward. And I wanted to hear a little bit about why you think this proposition brought together folks who are often not in the same conversations and are often opposing legislation. Why this brought together such a diverse group of advocacy groups and stakeholders?
Macy, do you want to go first, or would you like me?
I'll let you jump in and I'll fill in if I need to.
Okay. You know, I think we recognize that transportation investments touch our entire community and for different reasons. And so that's one of the reasons we felt so strongly about starting this effort with public engagement. In fact, so strongly that we had a dedicated contract just focused on the public engagement effort, separate and apart from the engineering and planning work, of course, that helped supported the long-range plan development itself. And so recognizing our community has a variety of different needs and voices. That's why we started this effort with that public engagement. Ultimately, you know, our region has a very unique history of our mayors and local elected officials coming together to do big things. You've seen a couple of them today. You've seen big transportation investments. You've seen the Rio Salado project. We have a history of doing really big things by coming together, and I think that's pretty unique. The fact that we have a unanimously adopted plan, fairly unique when I talk to my partners in other parts of the country, that every single mayor would come together, whether they're representing a rural community of 1,600 or the 5th largest city in the nation. Ultimately, I think that the benefit of visionary leadership we have here is recognizing that we all win when we come together. That also said, we recognize it's a very diverse community, and that's why we engaged and invited folks together from the beginning. The benefit of doing that is that folks from all different stripes and walks of interest were able to put their fingerprints on a plan and then collectively own the outcome. And that's why we saw such a diverse suite of voices ultimately down then at the legislature saying, hey, we were a part of this. We feel like we're part of this. We were helping to develop this, and our interests are represented. Even if they aren't necessarily the exact same as somebody else coming at this angle. And so again, the strength of diversity ultimately is really how we won the day. And particularly when it became quite political, that was the benefit of having diverse voices down at the legislature, joined in alignment with our local elected officials, whether they're representing a Native nation or a small city and town.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. Because Proposition 479 spans over such a large area and MAG works over such a large area, really everyone is touched by this project. And so across all entity levels, across all income levels, like Audra was saying, everyone in metropolitan Phoenix area is impacted by Prop 479, from what they're purchasing in their sales tax to driving on the roads to work or biking to work. And so I think just having diversity across the board is what really brought in all those different levels of engagement and stakeholders. Because like was explained, everyone really was touched by this and involved in this project.
Wonderful. Thank you both. So we have a question in the chat about pedestrian safety. And, you know, you all are leaders in the Maricopa County transportation system. And this has been an issue ongoing in Maricopa and across the state. And I wanted to hear from you about how bringing together diverse partners, about, you know, bringing together politicians, nonprofits, advocates, how you are considering working together collaboratively to solve this ongoing challenge and epidemic that does impact many people and has affected many lives.
Yeah, thanks, David, for that question. You know, I think a metropolitan planning organization plays a unique role, not just limited to our planning capabilities, but at least for our region, for MAG, we bring the benefit of data. So I would answer that bridging of the gap and how do we address the planning and political conundrum with just data first and foremost. And I think we're committed to doing so and starting this conversation with our policymakers. It was an expressed interest. We've dedicated specific funding in our plan for a variety of safety investments, including that large amount for active transportation. So we've heard loud and clear it's a priority from the community. And we started to acknowledge that we're going to have some difficult conversations ahead, and our city managers acknowledge that and are willing to take it on, as well as our elected officials. And so first and foremost, our solution is data. And so we've actually, in the development of our work program, is setting aside funding to acquiesce more data, to be able to better leverage and understand crash data, be able to identify what countermeasures may make most sense. But there's also a policy component to this as well. There's several $1 billion on the table for the region to invest in a variety of transportation solutions for the region. We want to be able to recognize the diversity of those needs, but we also recognize the power of the region being a funding contributor to those transportation investments. So as part of the policy development aspect, there's an opportunity, we believe, to be able to be partners early in those efforts, including safety study as part of the project development stages of regionally funded projects, so that we can identify and understand the safety issues, whether they are strictly for bicyclists and pedestrians or all users of the particular project, and then build those safety countermeasures or an understanding for how best to address the safety issues into the project itself. And so the design itself becomes part and parcel with the research on the front end. And so some of the things that we're considering is advancing policy where the region's going to be funding some of that, what we'd call pre-design, that maybe cities would normally fund, contributing to that as a funding partner so that we can identify and bridge this gap as partners with our local agencies who are ultimately the ones who own the individual infrastructure.
Thank you, Audra. And I'll just add that, we at RTC think that trails can be a solution to some of these pedestrian safety issues that are ongoing. So hopefully that's part of the design that you're mentioning as well. So we have a question from a different David. Are panelists working with cities and developers to create synergistic outcomes in activating trail networks, parks, and new development communities? This could include designing trails through neighborhoods to be built and funded by developers due to the economic benefit of being part of the network. And they cite a really fantastic example of the Atlanta Beltline connecting directly to the Atlanta Botanical Garden. So I think this is open to Kay thinking about the study, as well as Audra and Macy, of course, if you have any thoughts as well.
Sure. Well, actually, we had the Atlanta Beltline actually do a presentation to our Active Transportation Committee, as well as in combination with our Transit Committee. So yeah, that generated a lot of excitement for member agencies to work on those types of projects. So in regards to the Rio Reimagined project, we'll be working directly with the member agencies, and they'll be kind of guiding those types of priorities as we develop the plan. So that's where we'll be able to prioritize these types of projects for future implementation. Also working with Maricopa County, who has just adopted a new Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which has identified that these types of trails connecting throughout our region, not just along that Rio Reimagined corridor. So that's a much larger study. And in fact, we are also at MAG engaging in an update to our regional active transportation plan. So if you look at the Rio Reimagined area, that's kind of just a sub area of the much larger plan that we'll be also engaging a consultant with generally around the same time. So that's a different focus to the Rio Reimagined. That's region wide, and this is very, very specific, and it's really looking at a river corridor alignment. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We have a few other questions. One thing I wanted to touch on, Audra, you were able to refer to a lot of advocacy and lobbying that MAG is able to do. That is something that oftentimes MPOs are unable to navigate. Can you speak to how MAG is able to play that significant role and the benefits of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in Arizona, we public entities, agencies are allowed to have contract lobbyists. So we are able to lobby, particularly on issues for which we're directly associated. In this case, the dedicated half-cent sales tax established by voters originally back in 1985 was of our making, of the Maricopa Association of Governments making, or the regional planning agencies making. And so we have a long history there. We don't typically do a ton of advocacy necessarily, but we're focused on the issues that are our lifeline. And because of the limited funding available at the state level in the state, recognizing a local funding source was necessary to deliver what in other places of the country the state would have otherwise developed. We've had this unique relationship in being not just the custodian to that half-cent sales tax, but ultimately the planning efforts that go along with that. And so we participated at the legislature in advocacy for the particular bill, or the bill vehicle that ultimately allowed what we simply were requesting, voters the opportunity to consider a 20-year extension of that tax. And we're, of course, over the course of 2 years, very active in doing so. Our city partners, our member agencies, and then I would say, but more by and large, the variety of different stakeholder interests, whether it's representing retirees, representing environmental interests, representing freight, the variety of stakeholders who came together to contribute to this plan development process were ultimately also at the legislature communicating their experience and certainly the advocacy for letting voters have the option and voice to be heard.
Wonderful. I think we have time for just a couple more questions. So there's a question about tax structure in Arizona. So get ready, wonks, for tax questions. Um, there's a question about whether Arizona relies more heavily on property tax or sales tax. And in reference to Prop 479, is the sales tax that funds this a marginal increase on a light sales tax? There's reference to a project in St. Louis that is funded through sales tax. And yeah, just wanted to hear a little bit more about the context there.
I'll take a shot at that. Although I'll provide I'm no tax expert, and certainly can't speak to all of the regions and states probably represented on today's call. But for Arizona, we have a bit of a balanced taxing structure at the state and local level. There's certainly property taxes at the local level, as well as sales taxes, a variety of them. There's also at the state level a income tax that's associated. So there's a kind of a multiplicity of taxing aspects, juxtaposed maybe to Texas, which is heavily focused on a property tax. So just to give that as an example, the dedicated half-cent sales tax for our transportation network, that's the same rate as it has been since 1985. So the question before voters was continuing that tax. So what they pay December 31st of this year will be the same that they pay on January 1st and have since 1985. Several of our cities here in our region also have a small sales tax that they use for transportation a lot of times, and focus specifically in transit, because there is no statewide funding source for transit in the state of Arizona. That puts all of the pressure on our local cities and the region to deliver transit solutions. So that's a bit of a additional element of that question, which I think is important relative to the larger scheme here. So we have just a variety of taxing tools, and the sales tax is a half-cent sales tax here. Several of our cities also have options to add and have fragments of cents for those kinds of solutions as well, in addition to the state, which issues a statewide sales tax as well as an income tax component.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one last question. So I think this ties in to both the Rio Reimagined study and Prop 479. What are some of the approaches to initial outreach that helped engage diverse groups and constituents that might not have been included in other situations? I know this is something that MPOs and other agencies really grapple with, is how to reach folks who are not already coming to the meetings. Often it's the same 10, 15 folks with their hands raised. So how did you approach making sure you're reaching folks across the board?
I'll answer it from a big plan development perspective, but Kay, certainly jump in with more of a tactical corridor project perspective. I think public engagement is always tricky, because you want to invite folks to the opportunity, but as Kay mentioned in the presentation earlier, you recognize everyone has competing demands as well, and so balancing both of those. I think a couple of our strategies is we had big vision for hitting the streets and going to festivals and being where people were already at as an opportunity to organically get feedback. And we walked right into the pandemic. And so we had to quickly shift our focus on how we imagined public engagement. So we went to a virtual, obviously, portfolio, and then leaned even heavier on organizations as amplifying the message for opportunities to engage. So we built a database of a variety of interesting stakeholders, advocacy groups, anyone who had an audience that might be somewhat interested in something about transportation, asked for their partnership and used those as vehicles for opportunities to provide feedback. We used social media and geofenced where we were seeing areas of our region we weren't hearing much from. So in our public meetings, we were getting a lot of interest from maybe one part of the valley, but we weren't hearing from a large part. We would target our social media ads for feedback and engagement in those areas that we weren't hearing anything from, hoping that somebody sitting at their home might get that targeted ad and click through and provide us some feedback. I would also encourage folks to use survey technology and do so. We did a couple of statistically valid surveys. So we didn't invite people, or we didn't wait for people to come to us. We went directly to them and not knowing what the bigger picture of engagement was. And so we did a statistically valid survey on the front and the back end of our planned effort over 5 years. So people weren't necessarily understanding what they were providing feedback to or for. They weren't waiting to invite themselves to the party. We were using a survey partner to be able to get that feedback. And that was really important because it allowed us to ensure we were oversampling for sometimes underrepresented populations in our region, and not just waiting for them to take up our invitation to participate. Kay, do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I'd just like to add that, yes, with the Rio study, we'll utilize those same techniques, but we have talked to some of the community-based groups and advocacy groups up front and looking at ways to reach these populations. And so they'll be helping us when we draft that community engagement plan. We have the benefit of the Rio Reimagined network, all the advocacy groups and nonprofits. So we'll be able to access their expertise as we develop that scope of work. So to me, that's exciting. We have this huge built-in network. And also with meeting with the Rio Reimagined staff and the City of Phoenix staff who are currently looking at 20 miles of the river corridor right now, we're benefiting from the work that they're already engaged in with the community. So we're, checking in on lessons learned, how they could have done it better. So we're learning from each other. So as Mag kicks off the study, I think it's going to be, we'll be able to build on that. So I'm very, very excited about that.
And just thank you so much. And just a quick follow-up in the chat about bilingual or yeah, if you want to verbally answer that before we log off.
It's so important. I was just typing an answer because I'm so glad that question was asked. We did. So we had for our live meeting events, actual simultaneous Spanish translation. So we had a dedicated channel where people could tune in and hear the Spanish translation. That included a lot of pre-work, both to make sure we weren't using as much jargon as possible. Sometimes us technical folks can get that way. And empowering our translators to know the right words to use so that it was a seamless transition. We also had live American Sign Language as well. And so in our virtual events, that was also embedded on the screen. I'm really actually proud of how we were able to reduce some of those barriers. We didn't necessarily get a ton of engagement on both of those fronts, but I think we felt good that we weren't limiting or providing a barrier for participation accordingly.
That is wonderful and such a great point to end on when we're thinking about collaboration and engagement and reaching folks. So huge thank you, Kay, Audra, and Macy for giving us this incredible case study and a variety of different opportunities to collaborate, really looking at Maricopa as a great model. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll be sending a brief survey to hear back from you, and a recording will be available in the coming days. So we hope to see you in Cleveland for our summit. And until then, look out for more content online and via email. So have a great afternoon, everyone. And thanks so much again to our esteemed panelists. Take care.